Millions of despairing men, women, and little children, victims of a system that makes men torture and imprison innocent people.
You cannot shake hands with a clenched fist.
Produced by a nuclear exchange would be carried by wind and water and soil and seed to the far corners of
the kingdom of God, the kingdom of heaven.
It's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
We're not saying that planet Earth is coming to an end. We're saying that planet Earth is about to be refurbished, spaded under, and have another chance to serve as a garden for another civilization.
Most of the people in here are just your reflections. They're your mistakes.
1776 will commence again if you try to take our firearms.
1 million of the planet's 8 million species are threatened.
You are what you repeatedly do. Therefore, excellence ought to be a habit, not an act.
Your lives and the credibility of the United Nations is at stake.
Epstein didn't kill himself.
The reason this is such an interesting time is not only because we're on the threshold of the end of this civilization.
They're trying to take you out with bullshit.
The experience of the past 2 years has proven beyond doubt that no nation can appease the Nazis.
To those who can hear me, I say, do not despair. The misery that is now upon us is but the passing of greed, the bitterness of men who fear the way of human progress. The hate of men will pass, and dictators die, and the power they took from the people will return to the people. And so long as men die, liberty will never perish.
In the language of the U.S. Department of Defense, these are unidentified aerial phenomena.
Roswell's a very interesting place with a lot of people that would like to know what's going on.
There is very compelling evidence that we may not be alone.
This is the Garden of Doom.
Welcome everyone into Garden of Doom, and this week we are rejoined by one of our favorite guests. He's only been on once before, but I'm sort of a fan, and his name is Reverend Jim Willis. How are you, Jim?
Real good, Jeff. Thank you.
Good. That's terrific. He's coming to us from, I believe, undisclosed location somewhere in the American Southeast, in the Blue Mountains or the Shenandoah Mountains. Is that what they're called?
No, well, it's in South Carolina along the Savannah River.
Oh, I got it all wrong. You're much further east. All right. Well, very good. So he's disclosed the location, sort of.
Yeah, that's all right.
Yeah. Now. It's Reverend Jim Willis. He was a member of the clergy for something like 4 decades. He's now retired. He's a prolific writer. He's written about 14 or 15 books. He's got a couple coming up. He was on this show once before, and we talked about a bunch of stuff, but most of it's centered around his book called Censoring God, which is a wonderful book and a really easy read. And if you like Von Daniken, and books like that, but you also like it to go a little bit further and maybe be a little bit easier to read with less question marks, Censoring God is for you. He also wrote literally an encyclopedia on religion called The Religion Book. And I have it, and you can get this big, really an encyclopedia type book for like $20 on Amazon. And he's written lots of stuff that you would not normally associate with a member of the clergy. And he told his story in the last show, so I would certainly recommend that you listen to the prior episode to get background on Jim, and really to listen to that episode. If you could just tell the folks a little bit about yourself and your background.
Well, sure. I was in the clergy for 40 years, but besides that, I was also I've been a writer for the last 10 or 12 since I retired from the active clergy. 20 books now. And when you talked about the religion book for $20, I happened to see a copy of it the other day on the on Amazon for $1.50.
Wow.
That's really a compliment to an author, isn't it? But at any rate, I've been a musician my whole life. Matter of fact, that was my first career. And I also did a lot of part-time carpentry. So I am actually living in a house that I built myself. And my daughter, Jan, who is my tech guru, lives next door in a house that I built for her. And we live out in the middle of the woods, days and weeks go by sometimes without seeing anybody unless we go outside the gates and go to the store. I guess Hermit Jim from South Carolina or something like that. But I must say, it's when I look at the news and see what's going on out there in the world, the woods looks better to me every day.
Yeah, I'm sure. Enjoy the peace. So yeah, so it's Reverend Jim Willis, but you've been in a bunch of different ministries, as I recall.
Yeah. I was a pastor of mostly small churches for 40 years, from Massachusetts to Arizona to Florida, where I finally wound up. Matter of fact, I guess it was in my genes or something else, because when I retired out here to South Carolina, I came out here with an agenda. Most clergy, when they retire, they always figure they'll do some part-time preaching on Sunday and filling in for people who filling in for ministers who were sick or on vacation or something like that. But I came out here with a real agenda, because when you're in the clergy, you always think that most of us joined when we were young because we wanted a spiritual family around us. We wanted somebody we could, a community of people that we could raise the deep questions. Who am I? Who or what is God? And all that kind of thing. And when you actually get to be the pastor of a church, you discover it's not like that at all. Matter of fact, it's more like a business than anything else. And you're always concerned about the next church service, the next meeting, the next seminar, the next social event, the next activity. And 40 years goes by real quick like that, and you realize you haven't really done what you set out to do. So when I retired, it was with an agenda. I wanted to experience this whole spirituality that I've been preaching about for 40 years, and felt that I was preaching about rather than experiencing it. And so I came out here, and I even had a Bible verse in mind. The verse that I was thinking of it took place out of the Genesis, a story of Jacob and Esau, two brothers. And when Jacob stole Esau's birthright, he had to flee for his life up into what we now call Turkey, or Anatolia, where the home country came from, where Abraham came from, and all that. And after years up there, he came back down, and he was about to make up with his brother finally. And on the night before the meeting, he had no idea what was going to happen, whether his brother was still going to be angry or would forgive him or what. And he was pacing up and down like most of us do. And lo and behold, it says, a man appeared to him, and they fought together all night long. Mm-hmm. A strange verse. And Jacob, when the dawn broke and the sun came up over the river, he realized that he was fighting with God. And he said the great words, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And that was the verse that was in my mind when I came up here to live in the woods. I came up to go on a retreat for about a year, and I was just going to devote that year to getting to, wrestling with God. I was saying, "I will not let you go until you bless me." And, I was going to spend a year. So far, it's been almost 14. And lo and behold, God answered my prayer, not in a way that I expected. I did find that spirituality I was looking for, but it wasn't really within the Christian context. I guess that wouldn't have worked with me. It was much more in the shamanic tradition, or the nature religion, maybe you can say the pagan thing. But that thing, "I will not let you go until you bless me," that was the thing. But when I talked about that being in my DNA, a couple of years ago, I was asked to go to Cornwall and do a seminar there for a wonderful group of people on the roots of religion in the world today, the modern religion, the big five religions in the world today. And so I went over there and had a wonderful seminar, wonderful group with some great people. But then afterwards, I had to go up to this little town called Fenny Compton, where my ancestors preached. It was up northwest of London. My ancestors preached up there. My great grandfather and his family, they were members of the Church of England, and he preached in this little stone church in Fenny Compton that still stands. And I had to go up and see it. Sure. So I went up and I met the historian of the town, and she took me inside, and I was able to stand in the pulpit where my great ancestor preached. And while I was up there, I had an experience I will never forget, because I looked at the stained glass window in the wall that only he could see from the pulpit really well. He had to be in a certain position to see the subject of it. And lo and behold, the stained glass window depicted Jacob wrestling with God, saying, "I will not let you go until you bless me." Now, how that spiritual gene passed down through all the generations of Willises to me, and that was the one verse that was right here. So I kind of feel like I was, well, hair just stood up on the back of my neck. It really did. I felt somehow that many generations of Willises had been guided, and I was just following in line. It gave me a sense that probably all of us are much more guided and directed than we like to think we are sometimes.
Well, that whole discourse led to so many different doors that we can go down, but we can't go down too many of them. But one I have to. I just want to make sure that I understand correctly. Now, is it true that story of Jacob wrestling with God is where the word Israel came from? That Israel means
Yes.
to wrestle with, and El is the one?
That's right. Jacob's name was changed to Israel, which means he wrestles with the one, the I am, the God. Yeah.
Okay, excellent. So, all right. So I get my first gold star. But actually, the story is a perfect sort of segue into what is going to be a large topic today. And this is, I asked Jim to talk about a couple of mythologies, a couple of pantheons that are out there, but I haven't been able to find too many, people who with expertise on it. So why not talk to the guy who wrote the religion book, the actual religion book, which I'm showing here on a camera, but obviously this is an audio. So we're going to talk about Canaanite. We're going to talk about Babylonian and Sumerian, which probably starts in Anatolia. We're not going to go exactly in alphabetical order, but it sort of works out almost that way anyhow. But I'm going to try to do the primitive persons, meaning intellectually schooled in this area, historical timeline, and see if I have it right, because it's always sort of confused me, and I'm not going to ask Jim to clarify it and try to correct any minor stuff, but to see if I'm basically right. So if we go by biblical history, and we're going to do that right now for the purposes just of this discussion, world's about 6,000 years old. And basically day one starts with the word, and by day 6 you have Adam and Eve. Somewhere in there you might have had Lilith, where I guess if divorce is not approved by a lot of religion, certainly annulment is, because if you believe in Lilith, and then God certainly let that marriage be null and void pretty darn quickly. It took less than a day to say, yep, this isn't working out. Day 6, we have our day of rest, of course. And then we sort of have the begetting and the begatting. And somewhere in there you have Cain and Abel, and they have their dispute. Cain goes to a land that has a name in the east with goat herders that already exist. There's a replacement child for Abel named Seth. And through that you have a few other kids that you come to Enoch, who had Methuselah, who had Lamech, who had Noah. Somewhere in this timeline, all the world went bad according to God, whether it was because of the giants that were evil, whether it was because the sons of God, the angels, had intercourse and copulated with the daughters of Adam and created the giants and the Nephilim, or whether it was two different things, giants and Nephilim, or some combination of the two, or just humanity being depraved. But God wiped out everyone at this point except Noah and his family. And by the way, if this sounds like all men except for Eve and maybe Lilith, that's because my understanding from my yeshiva scholars is that every time a boy was born, they were basically triplets. There would be 2 twin daughters as well. So yeah, it was incest, but there weren't any choices. Anyway, so Noah and his family and, the animals, they lived somehow, although everyone was destroyed, some of the giants managed not to be, because there were giants still around somewhere. They play some roles with Nimrod and Babel and things like that. But that's not really the important thing for the moment. Noah had kids, and we get some name repeating if I'm not incorrect. He had a Cain, either his child or a grandchild. And from Noah, from Cain, people followed Cain, and those became the Canaanites. One was named Ham. Those, I guess they went to Africa, and they were called the Hamites. And I think there were some others, maybe Seth and other kids. And from there, I think we get led to Abraham and others. So this is sort of the timeline which, obviously Abraham's the covenant, and I'm not sure what the Jewish New Year is up to, but it's around 5,800, so somewhere in that neighborhood. So all of what I just said happened in about 120 or 130 years, which is, I guess a fairly short time, but there it is. Do I have that sort of right?
Yeah. Lilith is not in the Bible at all. That's an extra biblical thing. It comes from the Jewish rabbis later. And in terms of the 150 years part, it's actually about 2,000 years from the beginning until Abraham came, and then 2,000 years from Abraham to us. So that's what the Bible dates are. Now, of course, all that history, and Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and one of his grandsons was named Canaan, or we call it Canaan, who was supposedly the founder of the Canaanites. And this all happened in about 11 chapters in the Bible. Bishop Ussher, back in the Middle Ages, had it all figured out. He used all the dates in the Bible literally, and he discovered that the earth was created in October 4004 BC at 10 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday. So
okay.
he got all that from the Bible. Now, that's the Bible story. Does it agree with anything that the archaeologists or the geologists or the anthropologists say? No. No, it doesn't agree with any of that. And so there's many different ways to interpret all that. But yeah, you had the basic story right, and it's all covered so fast. 11 chapters and it's done. Then you start with Abraham and away we go.
Well, I got 130 versus 2,000 pretty wrong. I'm still not sure I understand it, but that's a different. My education on that is for a different time. I sort of just wanted us to get from where Noah was, which is probably somewhere in Turkey, and that's sort of where Abraham was, which then was in Turkey. It was Anatolia, and where the word Canaan comes from. And from here, it sounds like I got that close enough to being right. And from there, we turn to our expert. So,
I don't know about that, but yeah. So much of this took place in ancient Anatolia, what we call today is Turkey. For years, the anthropologists were convinced that our civilization began about 6,000 years ago, maybe 8,000 years ago, down in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia just means the land between the rivers, between the Tigris and the Euphrates. And the Sumerians were considered to be the start of the beginning of agriculture and the beginning of cities. And that was all cut and dried. Everybody just accepted that. The first nation, the first state, a city that was built probably was a city by the name of Ur. As a matter of fact, some people even had Abraham being born there. They called it Ur of the Chaldees. I don't think he was. I think he was, if there was an Abraham, I think he was probably born up in Anatolia. But that was all cut and dried for about 6,000 years. And then came the discovery of Göbekli Tepe, and everything changed. Yeah. Because Göbekli Tepe was built at least 5,000, maybe 6,000 years before any of this. And lo and behold, from genetic studies of plants as well as people, we learned that agriculture was not developed down in Mesopotamia. It was developed up in Turkey and Anatolia at the same time as Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe. So that's where our civilization really began. Now, in order to picture this, you've got to picture what they call the Fertile Crescent. On the right, In the east, it starts down in Mesopotamia right now where the Persian Gulf is, between the Tigris and Euphrates River. And you can draw this crescent-shaped moon that goes up the Tigris and the Euphrates until it comes to the birthplace of the four rivers that theoretically that's where the Garden of Eden was. And that's not too far from Göbekli Tepe. And then you can continue that crescent down to the Mediterranean, down into Canaan, or what is present-day Israel. And that fertile crescent, we always get the idea that when people move from one to the other, they just move straight from, say, Jerusalem to Babylon. Well, you didn't. You followed the rivers north around this fertile crescent and back down again. So here you got Göbekli Tepe, Anatolia, really, up at the top of this fertile crescent with rivers flowing down to the east and the south, eventually into the Sumerian cultures, the Mesopotamian cultures. And then you've got other routes going down to the Mediterranean, heading down west and south, down to Canaan, and eventually across the Sinai into Egypt. And so it's probably much more realistic to think that our civilization began not 6,000 years ago in Sumer, but closer to 10,800, 11,000 years ago, up in Anatolia, in Göbekli Tepe, which is fascinating because that's also theoretically where the Muslims insisted that that's the birthplace of Abraham. It's also the birthplace of agriculture, and of course the Bible talks about Cain and Abel. Cain was the agriculturalist who won the battle by killing his herder son or brother Abel, and that probably happened historically. I mean, not the two people, but I mean the agricultural civilization, which is symbolized by Cain, destroyed the hunter-gatherer herder civilizations that were built, represented by Abel. But also up in that same neck of the woods, not far from Göbekli Tepe, is the birthplace of the Garden of Eden, if there ever was such a thing. It's where the four rivers spring out, and two of them rise up from the same mountains, Tigris and Euphrates. And then it's also not far from Mount Ararat, where Noah's Ark was said to have landed. So I think we can probably trace not only the Sumerian culture, but also the Egyptian and the Canaanite culture. Maybe they didn't rise independently. Maybe they were both influenced by what was going on 11,800 years ago up in Göbekli Tepe. Now, of course, if you want to have some real fun, you can say, well, what about Göbekli Tepe? Agriculture up in Anatolia came very quickly. How did a bunch of hunter-gatherers learn how to do that? Well, maybe they were influenced by somebody in turn. And the influence now is that, the understanding now is that perhaps they were in turn jump-started by a higher civilization that was destroyed during the global cataclysm, which probably set off the Younger Dryas Ice Age. Now, we're getting really big time scopes here. I don't want to jump ahead too far, but
right.
Does that make sense so far?
Yeah, it certainly makes sense, but I think you're right. It is probably a good place to cut off because those are all different shows and probably covered parts of them in different episodes. And if you ever want to, you have an open invitation to always come back.
Great,
in fact, you can take over the show. It'll probably do better. Just keep me on as a co-host. Or a mascot, something. But yeah, so we
well, yeah. Let's just can we go downriver to Sumer first?
Sure, absolutely.
Let's just say, for the sake of argument, and I'd love to say this as if I have all this archaeological evidence.
Oh wait, for 1 second, can we talk a little bit though about Göbekli Tepe and
sure.
on some of the not the capstones. What are the lintel stones? What are the side stones? The ones.
The big T-shaped pillars.
Yeah,
they Göbekli Tepe.
They have a lot of imagery carved into them that matches a lot of different gods and myths from a bunch of different cultures. So it's almost between the age and the differentiation on the artwork there. it's almost inevitable that, at least for the modern time, that almost objectively, that a lot of different mythologies stem straight from there.
I think so. I think you're absolutely right, Jeff. Sumer was settled first between, say 4,500 and, say 4,000 BCE. But Sumer, down in Mesopotamia, was settled by a non-Semitic people who did not speak the Sumerian language. The very first thing we had, they didn't speak Sumerian. That developed. These people who settled down in the Mesopotamia region were called Proto-Euphrateans or Ubaidians, from the village Al-Ubaid, where their remains were first discovered. And they were the ones that in Sumeria brought agriculture and trade and industries like weaving and leatherwork and metalwork, masonry and pottery. These are all the symbols of civilization. This is what marks the civilization. So you say, well, where did these people come from? Well, probably Anatolia. It was right after the last big ice age. And as you say, up in Göbekli Tepe, there was a very sophisticated mythology going up there. So obviously, these people up in Anatolia were not simple hunter-gatherers who just moved from place to place. Well, down in Sumeria, within a matter of a couple of thousand years, they had invented the wheel. They had produced the first written language that we know about. They had mastered sailboats and developed agriculture, and they had advanced irrigation systems. They even built what some consider to be the first city, although people in India and China would probably argue with that. But the oldest city in Sumeria, down between the Tigris and Euphrates, was probably Uruk, but its capital was Eridu, and it's said to have been the place. This is fascinating. Now, it was said to have been the place where the gods first gave humans the gifts necessary to establish the first civilization. Now, if the Sumerians if the Anatolians came down the river and brought with them that mythology and all those inventions of basically new civilization, obviously within 1,000 years or so, they were remembered no more as people. They were elevated to gods. Now, they had become mythological. If that's the case, then the real civilization first started, marks its location where the modern world begins, is up in Anatolia, spreading southeast down to Sumeria. And you might say, well, how do we know all this? Well, it gets a little complicated, but basically through a couple of texts that have been discovered. One of them is called the Eridu Genesis. It's an ancient Sumerian epic, probably, maybe even 6,000 years old. And it's concerned with the creation of the world, and it tells about the building of cities and the great flood that destroyed the world. And according to the epic, after the universe was created out of the primeval sea, and the gods had arrived, the deities fashioned men from clay to cultivate the ground and to care for flocks and perpetuate the worship of the gods. And this was the book that said that God determined to destroy mankind with a great flood. Enki was the god. He was the good god versus his half brother Enlil. Enki, the good god, heard about Enlil's plan to destroy the earth with a flood, so he revealed it to Utnapishtim, or Ziusudra, as they said in Sumerian. And it turned out that Utnapishtim built a huge boat in which he successfully rode out the flood. Is this story sounding a little familiar?
Just a bit.
It's the same story as Noah, and afterwards he was given immortality. But the other book, the other text that we have, is from a man by the name of Berosus, who was in the Babylonian era. He followed the Sumerian, but he remembered the Sumerian myths and wrote 3 books. In the first one, I love this story. It's full of ideas. A god by the name of Oannes, who was half fish, half man, came ashore in Babylonia at a time when men still lived, as he said, like the wild beasts. And Oannes taught them essentials of civilization. He taught them how to write and the arts and law and agriculture and surveying and architecture. I love this because this Oannes was supposed to have been half man and half fish, and it's the very same imagery that we get out of the early Mayan culture and the early Olmec culture.
And the Dogons.
Yes, same thing. Right, exactly. First Berosus says this Oannes, his whole body was like a fish, and he had under a fish's head, he had another head, and also feet below, similar to that of a man, subjoined to the fish's tail. It's almost like a shamanic figure wearing this robe of some kind, or this decorative garment. And it said his voice was articulate and human, and a representation of him is preserved even to this day. Well, we got a lot of statues around the world. It said when the sun set, it was the custom of Oannes to plunge back into the sea and abide all night in the deep because he was amphibious. And he said he gave them insight into letters and sciences and every kind of art. He taught them to construct houses, to found temples, to compile laws. Interestingly, again, Göbekli Tepe was said to be the first temple that was ever built. He brought that down to him. He explained to them the principles of geometry, and he made them distinguish the different seeds of the earth and showed them how to collect fruits and in short, agriculture. And he instructed them in everything which he could tend to soften manners and humanize mankind. Didn't do a very good job in that regard.
Well, we don't really know how bad we were before.
Yeah. Oh, can you imagine if it was actually worse? Wow. So I don't know if you want to sum this whole thing up. The gods of Sumer, probably inherited from Anatolia. We don't know for sure, but it certainly seems to be that way. So who were they? Well, they were either completely mythological, just made up, or they were immigrants from somewhere else, and then later generations mythologized them. The Sumerians were brilliant people. They came up with all the hallmarks of what we call civilization. They came up with, reading, writing, arithmetic, and all of that. So, I don't know. When they say they were given these gifts in the beginning, rather than take the natural, prideful way of saying we invented them, they said we were given them in the beginning by someone they called by name and described in great detail. To me, it seems like we just kind of have to take them at their word a little bit. It makes sense anyway. So where might these gods have come from? Well, as we said, probably upriver from Anatolia. If we follow the Tigris and Euphrates upstream, we come to right near Göbekli Tepe, where the first temple was built, and was where, as you pointed out, all those images show up on the T-shaped pillars. And as we said earlier, nearby stands the traditional location of the Garden of Eden, and a city, perhaps, Canaan Tepe. It was just discovered. It's less than a couple of years old, and it seems to be kind of a city, whereas Göbekli Tepe is more of a temple. But it's interesting that when it said when Cain killed his brother Abel, he went out and built a city. You got to say, did Cain or the people that he represents in mythology, did they move down the river and build that city called Uruk?
Well, that is much closer to the, I don't want to get into the woo-woo too much, but that's a lot like the Masonic legend, is that all good things came from Canaan.
Yeah. But I hadn't even thought about that. That's excellent, yeah. But I don't know.
A new book coming. I feel it. I see it.
Could it be that you said we're asking all the questions, so all the question marks? Could it be, as Von Däniken loves to say, that this civilization of Sumer was peopled by a possible civilization that was destroyed by a great cataclysm that was recognized as a great worldwide flood? Maybe it was just a local flood that felt like a world flood. But if you put it all together, it starts to form a good picture. They seem to say that a group of gods, and we'll put the name in parenthesis, who might very well have been a remnant of a civilization that was advanced enough to appear well beyond the capabilities of hunter-gatherers, for instance, existed between the Tigris and Euphrates River. Did they arrive suddenly on the scene and jumpstart the locals and start a civilization that would endure while keeping alive the memories of their founders who were eventually seen as gods? And who were these people? Where did they come from? We simply don't know. I like the idea that they were survivors from a worldwide catastrophe that concluded with the meltdown following the end of the Younger Dryas Ice Age. The dates certainly match perfectly. Göbekli Tepe suddenly springs up from the ground right after the Younger Dryas in a very short time. Sumer and Egypt soon followed. Going down the rivers, you hit Sumer, and going down the other way toward the Mediterranean, you hit Egypt. But the neat thing, the thing that really gets to me and that I really love to think about, is that if you take the myths seriously, the gods who taught the ancient Sumerians the arts of civilization, they were really folks from a forgotten past. We don't know anything about it. It's been obliterated. And if so, considering that our civilization began there in Sumer, that area, we owe them the world, the whole world that we inherited. They were our mothers and fathers. We are who we are today because of them. And I think that makes them extremely important. And I just don't understand why we don't teach this stuff more in school, because we want to know who we are, where we came from. Well, that could very well be it.
Yep, that is for sure. So, without the who's, and yes, they could be from an ancient civilization. Maybe they were gods. Maybe they were aliens. That's my favorite, of course.
Yeah, of course. There's nothing. That could be. It's a very real possibility. Ever since Sitchin came along and said the word Anunnaki means, those who from heaven above came down,
right.
Which is a whole other. Come to think of it, we talked about Sumer. Can I take off and rant just a little more?
You can do whatever you like. Yes.
One of the great things that followed Sumerian was the whole Babylonian culture that superseded the Sumerians. And back in 1853, Hormuzd Rassam, he discovered fragments of an ancient Sumerian text, which is now considered to be the first great work of literature our civilization ever produced. And it was translated in 1870 by a George Smith. And although it was known by serious Mesopotamia scholars far and wide as the Epic of Gilgamesh, it was generally consigned to oblivion in the popular press. It took Star Trek to open our minds and open people's hearts up to the Epic of Gilgamesh. One of my favorite episodes of Star Trek, The Next Generation, in the 5th season, the 2nd episode, entitled Darmok. Patrick Stewart's character, Captain Picard, quoted the lines, "He who was my companion through adventure and hardship is gone forever." And as soon as you heard Captain Picard say it, everybody went to the internet and began to read the Epic of Gilgamesh. They wanted to learn more about Gilgamesh, the king of Uruk, that first city that we talked about. That's what?
Poor Enkidu killed by that mean giant.
Yeah. Enkidu going against Gilgamesh, the wild man who was created by the gods. And the Epic of Gilgamesh did contain a kind of I like to call it a hidden time bomb that would explode maybe 150 years later, because the Epic of Gilgamesh told of 7 judges of hell who set the land aflame in advance of the great flood, and those 7 judges of hell were called the Anunnaki. And Zechariah Sitchin picked that up and ran with it, and he believed that the Anunnaki were aliens. And it didn't harmony that 4 years before the Gilgamesh discovery, Austin Henry Layard had discovered, hidden away in the library of Ashburnipal, in what is now Mosul in Iraq, fragments of a 3,800-year-old manuscript containing a Babylonian creation epic called the Enuma Elish.
Yep.
And 27 years later, it was published by the same guy who published the Epic of Gilgamesh, George Smith. And it told the story of the god Marduk, who created humans as a slave race in order to serve the gods and to oversee the workforce. He created a team of, according to him, 600 watchers, or holy ones, who were also called Anunnaki.
Mm-hmm.
And 300 of them were supposed to serve in heaven and 300 on earth. And Marduk was the son of the god named either sometimes Enki, sometimes Ea, or the god of the waters. Here's where the flood starts coming again. But, of course, this made the case of the Anunnaki more confusing. Were there 7 of them, or were there 600? And some even translated in 50 or 900. And what did they do? This is the part that really gets me. Right out of the Sumerian legend, the Anunnaki is a generic term, meaning gods or angels of heaven and earth, or according to Sitchin, those who came down. And little did Christians know, most Christians today don't even realize, they were called Anunnaki, or watchers, and holy ones. And there's a well-known hymn. You go to any church, any Christian church, or Catholic church, or Protestant church in the country today, and you look in their hymn book, and you'll find a hymn called "Ye Watchers and Ye Holy Ones," written by Athelstan Riley, and he considered them to be ranks of angels, but no, came right out of the Sumerian epic. So even today, most Christians don't realize every time they sing the hymn, "Ye Watchers and Ye Holy Ones," which is one of my favorite hymns, they are honoring the Anunnaki of the Enuma Elish when they sing it. I just find that's absolutely fascinating.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that are sort of canon in Christianity that, frankly, are not in any part of the Bible whatsoever. They're all over the place. I mean, just go into YouTube and you can look up a show on the 7 Princes of Hell. You can look up all these things on the Watchers and the war between angels, and Lucifer and God. And none of that's in the Bible. Not even a little bit. The word Satan, I think, only appears 3 times in the Old Testament, and it's not as the devil. It's basically an angel of sorts doing God's bidding, sort of as the accuser, or the adversary.
That's right. The word, the Hebrew word Satan, the accuser of the brethren. He's the one who's supposed to watch and see what's happening.
He's like constantly testing Job in a horrible way.
Terrible.
But but there is a lot of overlap, which is, I mean, so much fun and so fertile, and it's over so many different time periods that this is one of those I call hall of glass, hall of mirrors, where you never know where something begins or ends. So for our purposes, let's start with, I guess, the Sumerian panoply. So who's their king of the gods or queen of the gods, if they were a matriarchal?
Well, it's there's a lot of difference of opinion. There's a bunch of them that show up over and over again. The 2 that we have to really remember, I think, more than anybody else, are Enlil and Enki. And Enki was, and his sister Nenki, they were what we might refer to as the good gods. They were on our side. And and Enlil was the one who wanted the slave race. And Sitchin goes on to say that Enlil was actually an alien from the planet Nibiru, and who wanted to mine gold because his home planet needed it to see their atmosphere to stay alive. But Enlil was just interested in having this slave race who would basically mine the earth. And Enki was the one who said, "We can't do that to them. We've created them. We've genetically engineered them, or created them, however you want to say it. And we just wouldn't be fair to do that." But Enlil was the one who wanted to destroy the whole world with a flood and get rid of the human race, because Enki had basically made us human. Some people say if he's an alien, he did it by genetic engineering. If he was a spirit being, he did it by perhaps seeing that the sons of God, like Enki, saw that the daughters of men were fair and actually mated with them. I don't know how the mechanics would work when it comes to having sex with an angel, but, there you go. The interesting thing about this, I mean, we followed it from Anatolia down to the south and the east to the Mesopotamia. If we take it from Anatolia and go west toward the Mediterranean down into Canaan, we get a whole different concept of the gods. Down there, El is the creator god and his consort Asherah. And then there was the storm god Baal and his sister Anet, who was a goddess of hunting and warfare. And El, the chief god of the pantheon, is identified in Canaanite art as a seated male figure with his arms raised as if about to give a blessing. The trouble is that most of us, when you look at Canaanite gods, always see them as bad guys, because what we know about them, if it comes from the Bible definitely says the Canaanites were supposed to be destroyed by the Israelites. And it's funny because Yahweh, for instance, YHVH, or Jehovah, sometimes it's translated, is supposed to be the god of the Israelites, but actually he was first a god of the Canaanites. He was the Canaanite god of metallurgists, and the Canaanites had a whole bunch of polytheistic gods, household gods and goddesses, and they were called the Elohim, which in the Old Testament is also a name for God.
Right.
So, yeah, go ahead. I'm saying.
I don't know, though. I mean, I think one of the things about the Canaanite mythology or pantheon that fascinates me so much is that most gods look elegant. The Egyptian gods, even though they're animals, they look beautiful. They're ornamented, they're well dressed, they all have accoutrement, they look elegant. Enki and Enlil, whatever they look like, whether they look elves or humanish, or they're in a society. The Greek gods were humans. Even the Norse gods were humanoids, but the Canaanite gods, they weren't. The Baal was a giant black goat with with muscle. They looked like where the wild things were. They looked like monsters. They didn't. In our image of God and gods is largely human, or at least elegant, beautiful. Humanoid, anthropomorphized humans. Like Quetzalcoatl may be the closest, but even that, it was sort of like a Technicolor dream coat of feathers and white light and all that. But the Canaanite gods, no, they're like primordial. They're more. They feel more ancient, more close to our proto-humans, despite the fact that their properties are probably no different than any other pantheon period, or neither worse nor better. Just more or less the same. And as you pointed out, some things are borrowed. El is borrowed. Elohim is borrowed. Yahweh, Jehovah, borrowed.
It's really interesting to me to see how this comes, because much of what we know, what we think we know about the Canaanite gods, comes from the Bible, and of course, the history is written by the winners, and so the Bible tells us one story. But we have to really question what the Bible says, because the Bible said, for instance, that the Israelites came in and destroyed all the Canaanites, but DNA says no, they didn't. The Canaanites had pretty much the same DNA before the Israelites as they do now. So you begin to think that, well, maybe that didn't happen. And then we find all other kinds of DNA, that Canaanites built cities all up and down the Levant. That wonderful town of Jordan, the city of Jordan, that was theoretically destroyed by the Israelites when they blew the trumpets and
Jericho.
And Jericho, I said Jordan, I meant Jericho. When they blew their trumpets and the walls came tumbling down, Jericho may be the oldest continually occupied, or pretty much continually occupied city in the world. That was a Canaanite thing. The Canaanites may have inherited DNA from the mysterious sea peoples too, who brought about the end of the Bronze Age. So It's really tough to know. It doesn't seem as though the biblical account can be justified by modern DNA and everything else, and
or archaeology.
Or theology. Yeah. All we can do is just watch it. I mean, how could the good God Yahweh, or Elohim, who was a Canaanite god, how could he say, "Thou shalt not kill" in the Ten Commandments to Moses, and then a couple of pages later say, "Now go kill all the Canaanites, men, women, and children, and animals, everybody"?
Right.
It's just hard to fathom. It really is.
Yeah, there's a lot of that. It seems like the God of the Old Testament sort of kept some Canaanites and Philistines always in reserve to whenever the Israelites disappointed him, which they did plenty.
And those the Phoenicians, along the Levant and everything, could very well have been the first people to discover North America too. I mean, there's some evidence that they managed to travel out the Mediterranean through the Straits of Gibraltar and wound up in America. It was a tremendously sophisticated people. We're not served very well when we're just told all about the story that most of us have got in school, because it just is falling apart at the seams, and it's a shame. It really is.
Yeah, no, the Bible is not a good place to get your history from. I mean, it's fine as a source, but it's only one source. All right, so let's try to get beyond sort of the sociological impacts and just get to if we were going to write a comic book or the religion book, you can pick which pantheon you want to start with and sort of identify the major gods and sort of a little bit of their stories, and that would be great. That'd be so much fun.
Well, there's so many. If you take, for instance, some interesting crossovers, a god in the Canaanite pantheon rather, is actually a god by the name of Adonis, who's the god of youth and beauty and desire, the son of Astarte, and the Greeks took over. Greek mythologized him, and he became the lover of Aphrodite and Persephone, and he's linked to the planet Mercury. There was the goddess Anat, who was the virgin goddess of war and strife, and she was the mate or the consort of Baal, the god of the storm. Asherah is an interesting. She's the queen. She's another consort of El, and they used to celebrate Asherah by going up. See if this rings any bells. They used to go up on a mountaintop and put a pole in the ground and get big fancy streamers of all different colors and dance around the pole in the springtime, and to the goddess of Asherah or Asherah, and it's basically the beginning of our maypole dance, that came over to Europe. The god Atar is interesting. He's the morning star, sometimes called the son of the morning, and that was a name that was given to Jesus. I am the morning star, he said, and he tried to take the place of the dead Baal, and he failed. And here's the thing of Jesus, the son of the morning, beating death, Baal's bailiwick. Dagon or Dagon is the god of fertility and grain, and he was a big one that the Jews were constantly told they worship the god Dagon. And of course El, who sometimes called Elion, or the Most High, was the god of creation. We could keep going on and on like this, but there's a lot of changeover. And then again, we have to go into the Old Testament and look at the product of the kids who were born, the children who were born, the Nephilim, who were born to the sons of God and the daughters of men. They were called the Nephilim, but they were also called the heroes of old, the men of renown, which kind of takes us into the Greek pantheon.
Sure does.
And then you have to wonder, a man by the name of Enoch in the Old Testament, who has three names, one in Canaan, and one in Egypt, and one in Greece. He's recognized by all three. So there's a tremendous change back and forth.
Right. Yeah, there's this whole sort of almost going to where modern day, I guess, Iran ends, and all the way, sort of, basically the entire Mediterranean, even some of the northwestern African gods and goddesses are the same. There was I don't know who was the first. Maybe Ayana was Sumerian and became Ishtar in Babylonian, and Astarte in Canaanite. But that may also be Aphrodite, and I believe there's an African counterpart as well. But at some point, I think Astarte sort of became sort of both Aphrodite and Athena, or properties of both. And Isis, I think, is sort of like Athena. I mean, one sort of morphs and builds into the other, which is not unusual. That's been the course of history, and it's just that our written history really begins much later, and then most of our other written history is sort of going backwards, trying to, and then we find things here and there, but in languages that are largely lost to us and being subject to translations, which sometimes are mistranslations, and the history before that was just oral. So working backwards is always difficult, especially with oral traditions, which can change from town to town, especially when you go from, Uruk to Akka. Their patron god might be different, but the way we read it now, it may be like not as, we understand inherently that Athena was their patron god, and somebody else was the patron god of whatever, Corinth. But we seem to change that history or our interpretation of it when it's older than that. We don't understand one's a patron god, and that doesn't necessarily mean they're the king of gods. I mean, nobody says Athena was the queen of the gods. Zeus was the king of the Greek gods because it was written. So I think the very fact that things are written makes a lot different. I guess that's why they say the pen is mightier than the sword.
Yeah, give me that old-time religion. Yeah, there's an awful lot of crossover there. Awful lot. And then, we have to wonder, is it all mythology, or is there a kernel of truth in it, or is there a kernel of truth in it that points to previous civilizations on Earth, or perhaps alien intervention in the Earth in the past?
Well, I hope so. I mean, that's what I'm going with. For me, it always ends with the aliens. And then, of course, the people say to me, "Well, who created the aliens?" I don't know. I'm not eliminating divinity for aliens. I'm just eliminating our particular versions of divinity, or the way it's been written for the aliens.
Well, all the study that I've done, and all the writing I've done, and all the research I've done, I think people. Scientists make a big mistake when they just automatically eliminate alien intervention out of hand. There's just too much detail given in all these ancient myths to make me think that people just made up the whole story. And sometimes great strides forward in civilization happen so quickly that you have to say, where did we get those ideas? And I just can't help but think, I'm hoping that sometime in the near future we'll be visited by aliens who are watching us now, and who say, we're here to help. We've jump-started your civilization in the past. You guys need a new jump-start. I'd love to see that.
Oh yeah, I think we'd all love to see that, but there are other versions of how that can be, and lots of Hollywood producers have come up with many different versions of that.
They're always bad guys out to get us in Hollywood. That's for sure.
Not always. Lately, even going back to Starman and E.T. No, there's been plenty.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
We're essentially the bad guys, and then there's also ones that are more humanized, where it's sort of a mixture. They're not exactly so good and not so bad either, or they may be bad to us, but they have their own reason. Listen, if you are from the land of famine and starvation, and you are coming to another land to feed your people, you are your own hero. If you're in the land that has the food and somebody's coming in to do it, you're defending your land. They're the villains. You're the hero. So it's all perception. Anyway, so All right, so a lot of people conflate Sumerian with Babylonian, and that is not necessarily the case. While some of the geography occupies the same place now and even then, they are two distinct cultures and two distinct religions. Now, Babylonia is probably the one I know the least about. All I remember is when I was like 13 playing Dungeons and Dragons, I thought this god Elric was really cool. Past that, I don't know anything about Babylonian, except I think Ishtar is the Babylonian version of sort of like your goddess of love and lust and, you know, and like poetry and things like that.
Right. Well, Babylonians existed at the same in the same space in Mesopotamia, but they were about 2,000 to 3,000 years after the Sumerians, and they kind of evolved from. But that evolution was helped by a lot of mysterious people coming from a lot of different places. And in Babylon, we have it kind of tough because much of what we know about Babylonian culture and Babylonian gods comes from the Bible, because they were contemporary with the early Israelites. As a matter of fact, we talked about the Babylonian captivity, where Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came over and supposedly took the cream of Jewish manhood, marched them up around the Fertile Crescent back to Babylon. One of those guys he was supposedly caught in there was Daniel and his three friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And Daniel, we have the story in the Old Testament about he rose to the height of power in Babylon because he interpreted dreams. But of course, during Daniel's time, Babylon was overcome by the by the Persians and the Medes. So the Old Testament captivity in Babylon was right at the end of the Babylonian era before the Persians took over. But there's all kinds of other people who were taken away. Ezekiel was taken away in that great tragedy, and that beautiful, beautiful pen. How can I sing in a foreign land? It was just unbelievable. And Babylon was considered to be an impregnable city until it was taken over by the Medes and the Persians. So, you know, the famous writing on the wall took place in Nebuchadnezzar's feast. And the hand of God was theoretically seen on the wall to write the words, "You have been found in the balance, and been tried in the balance and found wanting." And it's just a wonderful story. But Babylon was also probably the birth of what we refer to today as monotheism, because when Babylon came over and took over the Jews were really still a polytheistic people. They weren't really monotheistic yet. If you read those early Psalms, you'll read, "My God is a great God above all gods." Well, monotheism doesn't recognize all gods. So the Jews were really still polytheistic. But often the Babylonian captivity is when they probably came across Zarathustra or Zoroastrianism, which was really a big monotheistic religion. And that was the religion in Babylon that had the idea of the good God and the bad God fighting with each other, God and the devil. And when Zarathustra rather spoke the words and began that great monotheistic religion of Zarathustrianism, of which, by the way, the three kings who went to Bethlehem at the birth of Jesus were probably Zoroastrian scholars. They probably worshipped in this way because Babylon was known for its worship of the night sky and the cosmos. So very probably the Jews got monotheism not from their own prophets and the theology of their own prophets, but very probably from that Babylonian captivity. When they came back under Ezra and Nehemiah and rebuilt Jerusalem, they were solidly monotheistic, and it probably happened because they came under the influence of the Babylonian religions.
It's funny, even though as you say it, though, it's not exactly monotheistic. There's a God and there's a devil. I mean, it's dualistic, but I understand what you're saying. There's only one good God. Yeah, no,
well, they get away from that by saying there's only one God, but he created a lesser God, and that God became bad. He was so he's not really a God, you know. But there's all kinds of theological doublespeak involved.
Yeah, at some point someone's going to teach me, and I don't mean, I actually literally mean that about Akhenaten and the story that may have been monotheism in Egypt and the alternate Moses story, etc. But
yeah, that's right.
I mean, I would argue that none of us have ever been monotheistic, at least not in I mean, you know, once you have a god and a devil, you've already thrown that out the window. And then what the heck are angels? I mean, if they have special powers and they're immortal, I mean, sort of sounds like gods to me. But anyway, we're getting away from. I mean, I could talk about this stuff, you know, literally forever.
Oh, sure.
But like, so who were the main Babylonian gods? They were not part of the Zoroastrian. I'll just call it religion.
Well, you know, there were many, and to be honest, I'm not going to be able to help you out too much right there because it's been so long since I've written about all these, and sometimes they all get jumbled together, and I don't want to give you any disinformation. So I guess I'm going to have to say let's come back and after I have a chance to brush up and see what I wrote and forgot, we'll have another show on Babylonian gods.
Accepted. Offer accepted. Perfect. Absolutely. Okay, so we have our Canaanites. Now, is it true that am I right that all of the Canaanites looked sort of like monstrous, like sort of like chimera, or was that just Baal?
Well, a lot of them did look that way, but then again, the images we have of a lot of them came from early Jewish, you might want to even call it propaganda. You know, they wanted to make the enemy's gods look terrible. It was the same thing that happened during World War II when we were fighting Japan, and the newspapers would run they would show these gargoyles up on top, and they'd say, this is what Japanese gods look like, these evil guys. Well, they don't, you know. I mean, we were just trying to make Japanese religion look bad because they were the enemy. And I'm sure that the Jews did a lot of that in Canaan, too.
Oh, so Baal actually just looks like a dude that he's been made to look like a goat. So like how Baphomet and Satan have sort of taken on that.
It's pretty bad because Baal, he was, you know, definitely the god to whom they sacrificed innocent children, and it was horrifying. Throwing live babies into into the fires of Baal to be consumed. That was pretty terrible. A couple of days ago, I wanted to just clear my head a little bit, so I turned on a YouTube clip of Mendelssohn's Elijah, and it's a wonderful piece of music. It tells the story of the great battle between Elijah and the gods of Baal up on the mountain, and 3 times God was Elijah. The prophets of Baal called upon God, the wind and the storm and all that kind of stuff, and the fires and everything else. And 3 times Elijah called upon the God of the Israelites, and finally Elijah prevailed. And Mendelssohn tells the story beautifully in his oratorio of Elijah. But of course, that kind of thing comes right out of the Old Testament, and boy, they did make those gods look terrible, didn't they?
Yeah, I mean, literally, they look like scary versions of Where the Wild Things Were, which were scary enough for kids, but
yeah.
You know, like basically, they make them look like how we think of, you know, demons now, and you know, again, Baphomet and images of Satan, just you know, absent the red and the all sorts of, you know, scary monster animal, animal gods, basically.
Yeah, terrible. Well, you know, Satan himself, in Christianity, I mean, we've had visions of Satan, satanic stuff, you know, that all dark and fiery and all this kind of stuff, and that's just natural human nature, I guess. We always want to make the bad guys look like bad guys.
Oh yeah, well that's been very effective propaganda too. Because if I mean, if it is correct, and by the way, I'm not sure where, you know, if it is, because it seems to be one of those things that, you know, took a lot of time to get there. But if Lucifer in fact turned into Satan, Lucifer was also the morning star.
That's right.
And that's Lucifer, right. The bright one, you know, the beautiful one.
The Bible said that Lucifer was the most beautiful created being ever by God. Right. But he fell from grace.
Yes. He was on the right hand. Yeah. I mean, not even in those Enochian books is Lucifer the leader of the bad guys. I'm not even sure he was listed in those 7 lieutenants. I don't think he made that list.
I don't even know. I'm not sure. No.
I think Azazel was the top dog leader, and there was a Belial, which is interesting because I also watched a YouTube video, and this was on the Book of King Og, which is, as it turns out, is a work of fiction. But the guy who was talking about it was talking about it, and he's in the ministry as well. But he was talking about it as if it was real. Now, this is when it first came out, and people, it wasn't all real. That's not particularly important. But he indicated that Baal or Baal became Baal, who also became Belial and Beelzebub. He said they're all the same.
Yeah, that's right. I think so. Yeah, it's interesting too that when we start, talking about these, we're influenced in ways we don't even understand by paintings that we have seen and forgotten, or pictures that we have seen and forgotten. The 2 places in the Old Testament that, if they are interpreted in one way, tell the story of how Lucifer fell. The story it's in the book of Ezekiel and in the book of Isaiah, and if you translate those together, it tells the story of how Lucifer was the son of the morning and the bright morning star and the most beautiful created being, and he was told he wanted to be like God, according to the book of Isaiah. The 5 I ams, or I wills. I will ascend to heaven. I will be like God. And for that, he was thrown off. Now, if you put that together with the Apostle Paul in the New Testament, you can create a theology that says that God had a problem when Lucifer rebelled against him. God could have just zapped him, because God can do anything. But then all the rest of the angels of heaven would have served God out of fear from then on, rather than out of love. And God had to show what could happen. So he blasted off the planet Earth and said, you're going to be transferred down there to Earth, and you can do whatever. And on Earth is going to become a test tube, a trial site where all the angels of heaven can look down and see what happens when people live in rebellion of God. And so our history is to teach Lucifer and the third of the angels that fell and became demons, to teach them what happens when people don't follow God. So we're, according to that theology, we're teaching by bad example.
Right, yeah, there are 2 things in that. One, that's basically exactly the Anunnaki version, just with different pronouns or proper nouns. 2, right. We're not here to serve God. We're here to teach Lucifer how to behave properly by doing what we don't do.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Muslims have a totally different take on that. Christians say and Jews say that Lucifer became Satan, or Satan, or the evil one, because he wanted to be like God. He loved himself more than he loved God. Muslims have a different take on it. Iblis, who is the Muslim devil, he worshiped God and loved God so much that when God created man, he said, now you've got to worship man because I have made him greater than the angels. And Lucifer said, I can't worship man, I can't bow down to man because I love God too much. And God said, well, you can't have that. So he kicked Lucifer out of heaven. And Lucifer still loved God to the end. And he was, how did he remember his beloved? How did he remember God for the rest of eternity? By the last words that God said to him. And the last words that God said to him were, go to hell.
Yeah, well, so poor Iblis is just jealous.
Yeah. Well, he just loves God too much, so he can't worship man. And it's a different take. Same story, different take on it.
It certainly is. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, I don't even know what to do with all of that information. So this actually is gonna strangely enough becomes its own decent transition. But actually, I'm not going to take advantage of that transition. I'm going to take go back a little bit to Babylon, because I read something today, and I don't know if it's correct or not. So I'm going to, because you earlier mentioned to me Ancient Origins, and I get that page as well, and so there's stuff on there, and some of it is is some speculation, some of it is sort of fan fiction, and and then some of it has bits and pieces of everything. Anyway, so what they said is that Babylon was founded by Abraham, and it may or may not have been the same Abraham that sort of had the Cain-like qualities of being able to teach all of these things, being one of those ancient ones who seem to be pre-Diluvian and taught them. Now, I don't know if it's the same Abraham or not, or just a namesake. It may not even matter. But is there anything to that? Is there any Babylon legend where someone named Abraham founded Babylon and taught them agriculture and poetry and art?
You're way ahead of me on this one. I've never heard that before. I missed the article in Ancient Origins, I guess. No, I had never heard that before. Okay. I don't know. I'd have to read some more about it, because I don't know where to go with it.
Now, I think I've read it once before, but it's not one of those things that I see time and time again. And to be frank, I can't tell you for sure that it's Ancient Origins, because I sort of get links to lots of different places. Once you get one, you start getting things from everyone. But I think it was ancient. Anyway, it doesn't matter, because there's also someone that's always writing on the Anunnaki myths, but tying them into all others basically, and saying that it's fact. But one of the interesting things you told me that the Lilith is nowhere in the Bible. In fact, that's absolutely correct. But Lilith might be Sumerian and Babylonian. There was like a Lilu, Lilitu in that, which is sort of like what she became after God. After God banished her from Adam, basically sort of like a harpy succubus thing. Basically, she steals babies. Basically, she takes babies. She made some deal with angels who were pursuing her, which has its own series of questions too as well. But apparently, that's why some people wear the amulets of those three angels around their necks, like pregnant women, to keep Lilith away. Because the deal she made is, if you leave me alone, despite what God told you to do, I won't bother any babies that are protected by you. So something like that.
There's a whole Hebrew mythology about Lilith that basically the story says that she was to be Adam's first wife, and she was not subservient like Eve was, and she wanted things her way, literally. Right. If you want to translate the Hebrew, right, basically it said Lilith wanted to be on top.
Right. I'm not really sure where the problem is, but okay.
And that was why she was cast out, and another woman was made, this time from Adam's rib. So she would be subservient to him, and that was the beginning. So if you want to go to any of the Lilith fair stuff going on today, these days, you'll find a very bunch of strong women who have rediscovered Lilith, and I think it's fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of different versions of Lilith, but if the origins might have been in this sort of like this harpy witch-like character who would steal babies, which I'm sure was basically a metaphor for why there's so much infant mortality and so many women died of pregnancy back then. And so they had to give a story about it, and whether it was to explain it or just to say, hey, be careful when you're pregnant, because let's not forget that women then were 12. They weren't, you weren't 22 or 32 or even 42. You were 12. Right. If you were 14 and didn't have 3 kids already, you had probably failed your family. Or at least tried. Anyway, but there was a Lilu and a Lilitu, and they were goddesses or demons, and sometimes it's difficult to tell the difference between what's a god and a demon, and of course we're putting English words on languages that were not English. They predate English, and they might not be exactly the right translations. So listen, I try every show not to babble about Lilith. In fact, I have a whole show on Lilith I keep kicking to the future, because I'm like, I'm always babbling about Lilith, and how can I put this show on? Because then it's going to be 2 hours of babbling about Lilith, as opposed to, and here I go again. So I apologize once again to Luke Michael Ironside, because your show's being cooked, but I always told him it would anyway, because He's also tied to that conference, the Nephilim, and I think it used to be anthropology. Yeah. It's anthrosophy, I think they call it now, a conference. Yeah. So, to promote that conference, I that's my excuse for kicking it down the can.
There you go.
But I have another show with him coming up before then too, so it's really a lie. It's just an excuse. Here I am I'm confessing to a member of clergy, so it's just between us. No one's listening. All right, so I will take the transition now, just because that Abraham Babylon story may just be just a story. So, talking about aliens, and so last week I listened to you on Earth Ancients. Everyone here knows I listen to Earth Ancients. I've never been afraid to talk about other podcasts here. Plus, they're 100 times bigger than I am. So it'd be silly for me to pretend not to. And that may be where I first became acquainted with you, period. And Cliff's been on the show, very kind. He was on, I think, episode 50, which was very nice of him to do. He certainly didn't need to be on my little show.
Cliff was the one who put me in touch with Ancient Origins years ago, too. When I began to write for them, it was because Cliff introduced me to the editor there.
Yeah, he's a generous soul. And the show that you were on was, part of it was going to be talking about First Contact, but he never quite got around to First Contact. Maybe because your time was limited, maybe because he got sidetracked on something else. But so I'm like, this is great. I'm like, I was going to listen to that episode and sort of borrow some from it and maybe revisit some of it and amplify on it. But instead I have like sort of the exclusive, the first take. What does Reverend Jim Willis, after 40 years in the ministry and many years after that of study and being clearly very open-minded, call it shamanic, if you will, considering the possibility of pre-Diluvian ancient civilizations, considering the possibility of aliens, what would your first contact protocols be?
To be perfectly honest, and this, of course, is my own strictly opinion, I'm not sure it would make one bit of difference, because over the years I've come to really believe that contact with aliens, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And I almost believe sooner rather than later. I spent a lot of my time as a fundamentalist minister looking for the return of Jesus. Now I'm looking for the return of the aliens. But I really have come to believe that the universe, statistically, it's just full of life. Now, of course, when we had the Fermi complex, the Fermi paradox, if life is out there, where is it? Well, I think we're seeing more and more of it. But there's only two places that aliens can come from, and that's from other places in this dimension, in this cosmos, or from another dimension. If they come to us from this cosmos, in, let's call them nuts and bolts spacecraft, to be honest, I really think that if that ever happens, they would be so far advanced from us, and they would have so much more experience at first contact situations that I think anything that we decide to do or not do wouldn't make any difference. I think they would take over, and any thoughts we have would be gone. I don't think they would need to pay much attention to us. I honestly have come to believe that many of the sightings that we're seeing now, and we're seeing more of them all the time, are a sign that things are getting closer. And we are being watched, and we are being judged. And we can stand up, tell them we insist on this and that, and I think they would be so far advanced from us that they would say, "Well, you don't understand. we're doing it."
I think that you're right. I mean, it really doesn't matter what our first contact protocols are. I mean, it's not a bad idea to come up with to have some sort of procedure, maybe for our own psyche, but we are so far beneath them. It doesn't matter whether we're waving white flags, coming out with guns ablazes. It doesn't matter, whatever it is.
No, it doesn't matter. And the other scenario would be that they don't come from this cosmos, that they come from a different dimension. And this protocol would be the same. They would be so far different than us that we just have to go along. To be honest, I think more of the problem is can we have a first contact without being ashamed of how humans are going to act?
Mm-hmm.
Because we have basically three different groups of humans in the world right now. There's a group of mostly conservative religious types, I'm sure, who would simply not believe that there was an alien contact. They would say it's a conspiracy. Some world government or something is faking the whole thing.
Or Satan.
I mean, yeah. Or, there are people who say we never landed on the moon or whatever. Obviously, we are reaching out on Voyager. When Carl Sagan said along the famous gold record, he was basically saying, this is who we are. In all those different languages and sounds of Earth and music and all that kind of stuff, he was basically saying howdy. And that has to stand for something, I would think. But there would be some people who would just say, no, it's a conspiracy. I don't believe it. The Earth is flat. We didn't go to the moon, and there is no alien thing as a world government that's trying to fool us. There's another group of people who would be jumping right in and trying to take power from it. A lot of our political leaders look at Project Blue Book. It went on for how long? Okay. And they kept it quiet. Why? Because they didn't want to give up the power they had. Knowledge is power. And we'd have to worry about them just as much. And then there's a vast majority, probably in the middle, that would say, well, let's just talk about it a little more. Let's form a committee.
Right.
and talk. And
let's worry about the pronouns.
Yeah. I would think more than anything else, we don't have to worry about how the aliens would act. I think they're going to be so far above us that we just can't even do anything. I think we have to worry about how we're going to act. And that's what scares me more than anything else. The idea of you go out in the woods and you see a Bigfoot, your first inclination is to shoot it. I think it would be the same thing with aliens. Aliens land, draw the gun, fire at them.
Right.
I just that would terrify me. It really, because I don't have a whole lot of faith in the human race when it comes to acting, because I think human beings tend to act on what they want to believe rather than what actually is. And I know that we've seen so many movies like, blowing away the aliens ever since Flash Gordon. All aliens are bad, and even Stephen Hawking suggested something like that. But no, I think I'm not worried about it personally. I know that there are a lot of people who are. They say, well, they may want to come here to mine our resources. I don't know, because there's more resources out there in the universe that they certainly need from this planet. Why go through the trouble?
Yeah, there's $40 trillion asteroids, and I only use that number because I read an article this week that NASA is thinking about abandoning the mission to get that $40 or $30 trillion asteroid. Yeah. Which I actually think is a terrible idea. I don't even care what the reason is. I think they should actually try to do that for so many reasons that are not important to this show. But on Garden Views, we talk about things like this, or will eventually. But I don't know. The world of science fiction gives us plenty of different scenarios. One is your Star Trek one, where you meet the Vulcans, but the Vulcans are, probably 3 or 4 generations of technology ahead, or, whatever, let's say 200 years ahead. So it's not that giant disparity. It's then you have your Babylon 5 first contact, not too terribly different, maybe 1,000 or 2,000 years difference in technology, but the culture got it so wrong that for the Minbari, that's what they were called, that their opening of peace, their white flag is that they open their gun ports to show you what they've got. Of course, the humans think open the gun ports means open fire. So
well, and then there's Carl Sagan's Contact, which says that it's not our protocols, it's their protocols. They have protocols. Right. So I don't know. It certainly is going to be interesting. I hope I live to see it. I really do.
Right. Our white flag might be the equivalent of a red flag to a bull to them. So we don't know that. So I don't know. It is interesting. I think you're right. We should probably just stand there, hands shown on our laps, and just don't make any sudden movements whatsoever. Let them dictate the flow. That I agree with the pros.
Don't embarrass the family, but I'm sure that an alien civilization that advanced to get here and to actually contact with us, I'm sure they would have been through this so many times that they know exactly what's going to happen. And
we're not their first rodeo. So Now, imagine I guess the nightmare scenario. Well, there's a couple. One is that it's not the Vulcans, it's the Klingons. They're there for conquest. The old Klingons, not the new Klingons. So that's one nightmare scenario. I guess the other one is that we are truly grasshoppers before them, and they're just like bugs, insects, don't care.
And you tend to invest your enemy with your own shortcomings. That your enemy is going to act the way you are. And to be honest, whenever we have gone into a foreign country and in our expansion from Europe to here or anywhere else, it's almost always been behind an invading army. That's our nature. So we figure they're going to be the same way. Sure. I think any civilization that can invent a technology that can actually take you between star systems, if they were that way and that was their nature, they would have destroyed themselves long before. They have. I don't really worry about us taking our own shortcomings out into the cosmos, because I think the way it looks right now, we're going to destroy ourselves before we do that.
Yeah. I guess the only scenario where it would be sort of awkward is that somehow we encounter a civilization that's sort of equal to ours or a little bit ahead of ours in terms of technology, and it is in fact their first experience with first contact as well of ours, which that seems to be. However you can make astronomical exponentially, mathematically slimmer.
Until we break the speed of sound, the speed of light, I don't think that's going to happen. But who knows? It's a pretty big jump to get to that kind of technology. So
your first contact is, don't worry, they're going to dictate the terms. If you try and dictate the terms, that's basically a fool's errand. I basically agree with you on that. But
there's nothing we can do about it. Even if they did want to destroy us, how are you going to fight against the technology that can actually get here from a whole different solar system?
Right. People say, we'll shoot nukes at them. Well, the nukes will not leave our atmosphere. They won't even. They won't. Yeah. I mean, far before where the atmosphere actually ends, their flights will end. So anyway, so that's fine, and we will. Folks out there, I will have other guests in the future between this show and Garden Views. We'll talk about First Protocol, so you'll get different opinions on them and just decide for yourselves what you think. But I thank you so much. I absolutely accept your offer to come back again on.
Thank you, Jeff. It's always a pleasure to talk with you. It always is, Jeff.
Likewise. So. I guess next time we'll be Babylonian, and maybe we'll throw in maybe we'll go further east, maybe go Indian as well.
Wow, yeah, terrific. Yeah. I have been fascinated by Indian culture. I used to teach Hinduism, but in my new book, The Wizard in the Wood, when I did the audio book, I wanted some really good music for it. And I got together with a friend of mine from India. I say he's a friend of mine. We've never met personally.
Cyber friends.
But and he's a wonderful musician, Ajit Padmanabh. And I've used his music in a lot of videos that we put up on my YouTube link. And just to talk to him, he's just like a breath of fresh air. His worldview and his total commitment to Hindu theology and Hinduism and basic Hinduism. It's wonderful.
I'd love to meet him. I'd love to have him on and talk about that if he's willing. But I mean, if you feel comfortable with it, that would be swell. You don't have to answer this on the air.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Please tell everyone where they can find your work, how they can support you, what books you have out there, what are coming out, your YouTube channel, everything in the world of Reverend Jim Willis, where they can help you out and follow you and help themselves.
Well, the easiest way is just to go right to www.jimwillis.net, and you'll find a link there to my Facebook page, and you'll find a link to my YouTube page. And on the YouTube page, there's all kinds of the videos that we've been putting out. I just had to recently back out of a tour to Turkey that was supposed to take place in October. And we decided to do a virtual tour. So we put up 6 so far, 1 more to go, 7 YouTube videos on different aspects of ancient Anatolia that people might find interesting. They're all about 6 to 8 minutes apiece.
Oh, yeah.
That's and so anyway, JimWillis.net, and you can find everything you want to know from there, I'm sure.
Excellent. And I really, folks, I seriously recommend Censoring God. It is an easy read, and it's well worthwhile. It's sort of like almost like two books in one, even though it's only like 300 pages. It's some people just have a gift with wordsmithing. I also read, and in this case, Censoring God, I read the actual pages. I read turn pages. The other book I read was an Audible book. It was something about your journeys in the Akashic Record, or so that was also that was fun. That was a little hippy dippy stuff. That was fun. The spiritual stuff.
Yeah, the Quantum Akashic Field. Yeah,
Quantum Akashic
Field. Book. Yeah, Quantum Akashic Field, a guide for out of body travel.
And the religion book, I keep it on my desk here, just for quick reference for everything. It is my starting place for almost all questions I have. I look to see, and it's alphabetical, folks. It's actually alphabetical, so it makes it so easy for you. All right, thanks so much for being on the show. We'll be in touch. We'll schedule another date, and if that gentleman on Hinduism is willing to come on the show, I would love to have him come on as well. That'd be great.
I'll talk to him, Jeff. Thank you. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate you. You have no idea. Thank you so much. All right.
Okay.
All right, folks. We wish Jim well, and we hope that you will rate, review, and refer the show. And you'll hear from us again next week in the Garden of Doom.
نبيات نوراي حياتي بريكون بمشام هروح بتعيما بكلات عنال دومين ناميد برغم بشمي هالغنا يا علو لو يشم الله عنو وحسف تطاي لو يباشوي مع الشير لا مدبارا شام هروح بتويما مقالات هنول دومي نامي دبرقم بشمي هروانا يعلو لو يشم اللانو وحسيف تطاي لو يبوشوي معشير لمي دبارا يا السحر